presenter, ladies and gentlemen, is Tim Durand. We know him as somebody who has lots of experience, not only at DBS and Marpin and now DNO, but also a gentleman who pens a good calypso and a few other songs that he used to play on guitar when I used to know him as a young I'm putting all the secrets out tonight. But we will not ask him to play the guitar this evening. We're going to ask him to respond to this question. How did Cadence-Lypso grow from that night in France to become a Dominican expression? Tim Durand, let's give him a round of applause.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Should I follow protocol? I want to say a very good evening to all of the guests, the dignitaries, and all important guests here. Dr. Kimon Joseph of the UE, Deacon Alvin Knight, all other persons who have turned out to witness the discussion this evening, the media. I know people tend to leave out the media sometimes and forget them. I am, being a media person, I want to ensure this doesn't happen. And everybody listening and watching at home this event this evening. The topic I was given is how did Cadence-Lypso grow from that night in France to become a Dominican expression? And for those of you who are wondering what that night in France, or before, if you had seen the topic and you were not sure what they meant by that night in France, then you heard Gordon a short while ago explain to you what happened, that eventful night in France. I also want to point out that in the program, in the little introduction given about me in the program, I did indicate that I hosted a program at DBS, or was it DBS or Radio Dominica? But anyway, one of them. I worked both at Radio Dominica and DBS. And the name of the program was Genesis and Beyond. But I see somebody has written Genes and Beyond, so I just wanted to correct that. Okay, and you would understand where the term Genesis came from in the context of Cadence-Lypso. Okay, so how did Cadence-Lypso grow from that night in France to become a Dominican expression? This presentation is making a number of assumptions. I was hoping that Gordon would have gone into a little bit more detail about what happened, because I wrote it in the way to kind of, continue from where I expected Gordon to reach. But he didn't, he didn't go very far. So I will just take it from where, I've started. We've already heard from Gordon that he and Exile One created Cadence-Lypso. And what I expected him to say was that it impacted in a big way, so that it set, the pace, it set the mode for the continuation of what has been over the years, perhaps one of the most impactful pieces of music coming from Dominica. But then when the music was created, after, it was created and it began to impact, Gordon Henderson, who, as you've heard, was one of the key people behind the creation of that music, he quickly positioned himself to take advantage of the interest that the new music was generating by learning about the business of music and how to read, write, and speak French properly in order to be able to make effective use of the media. The point here is that at the time in France and in the French territories, to be able to get on the media, on radio, television, you had to be able to speak French properly. They would not allow anything else. So if you were in that country trying to promote something and you couldn't speak French, you were at a definite disadvantage. So Gordon knew that, and he took he took the opportunity. He ensured that he learned how to speak French properly, how to read and write French properly, and he knew then that he would be in a position to utilize the media more effectively. Now, Mac Marie, whose name you've already heard here this evening, a Dominican music producer, very, very well known for his position as the husband of Ophelia, and copyright expert. He wrote in an article for the Cultural Division, and I quote, "With the help of this record producer, Henri Debs, Gordon's approach," or that should be with the help of his record producer, Henri Debs, "Gordon's approach was so successful that in no time the public in Martinique and Guadeloupe abandoned Haitian music in favor of Dominican music, with record producers and concert promoters falling over each other to sign up Dominican bands. These gave rise to Gramax, Liquid Ice, Midnight Groovers, Mammouth, and many others." But Gregory Wabes will tell you a little more about that in his presentation, because he's going to look at those bands, the actual bands that contributed to the spread of Cadence-Lypso music. In the meantime, Exile One had moved to Paris and was signed to Barclay Records, the first West Indian group performing in Creole to be signed by a major record company. The advent of Cadence-Lypso created an environment in Guadeloupe and France where one could make a reasonable living out of playing music. That's where it all started. That's how all musicians were going to get involved. The people in those islands were receptive to music and art in general. This reflected a feature of French society which was prevalent in the French territories. So when Gordon and other members of Exile One came up with that new genre of music, record producers in Guadeloupe and Martinique began to take note, recognizing the potential to sell records in a market that was quite large, comparatively speaking, and we say compared to Dominica, Guadeloupe, and Martinique, you know, it's pretty large. If you compare them to the United States, they're not that large, but comparatively speaking, for our musicians, that was a large market. So a record producer could make money. Going to dances was also a popular thing. Lots of people went to dance every weekend, and during the summer holidays, dances were held every day except Monday. So boy, the dances galore. I mean, you couldn't run out of places to play. There were some big dance halls that could hold up to 3,000 people. So music, especially dance music, could be quite lucrative. Moreover, there was a system of star recognition in those French islands where people took this concept of stardom very seriously. One could become a star and receive treatment akin to what stars in the United States get. So the star business in Guadeloupe and Martinique, you know, in the French territories was a big thing. So if you played your cards right, and you made some impact, you could become a star, and that would be good for you. We'll find out later on how that helped groups like Gordon Henderson, Gramax, and Our Lady of Song. At that time, though, our recording industry in Dominica was practically non-existent. I think the earlier recordings coming out of Dominica were done overseas, like Swinging Stars, I remember, and if I'm wrong, somebody can correct me, was done in Trinidad, Siflamotai in Barbados, but that was many years ago. We didn't really have any good recording studios. Our recording industry had not yet developed, you know. So record producers or people involved in the recording business from Martinique and Guadeloupe provided opportunities for Dominican musicians to record in those countries. Some of those bands that were brought over by the Martinican and Guadeloupean producers were not necessarily very popular in Dominica, but they were keen to grab the opportunity to play their part in playing and promoting the music. For example, how many of you here of my generation, except that you're from the village of Salisbury and environs, are familiar with the band, or were familiar at the time with the band Mammouth, before they recorded Mama Margerese in Guadeloupe? I don't know, but I didn't know about them until that record came out. And what happened, that song went on to become very popular. It was what was referred to in the French islands as a star-making hit. In La Réunion, for example, one of the French territories. That song was very big. And La Réunion is a country that, I mean, it is far, you know? You have a long distance to travel to get there. And to secure a gig in La Réunion, you would have to have something to offer. They're not going to pay their money, you know, to transport you to La Réunion if you are not able to help them recoup the money they spent. And so Mahmoud's song was so big that that alone was enough to secure them a gig in La Réunion. So, but nobody knew about Mahmoud and Dominica. But that is what was happening at the time, that musicians had the opportunity to go to Guadeloupe and Martinique, and the record producers in those two territories were very aggressive. You know, they would come and scout out bands and take them across to record. And when the records came out, that is when we found out, hey, that there was such a band, no? Like, you know, that kind of thing. So, as I said, you know, that Mahmoud song became very popular. But that Mahmoud experience, as I said, could also apply to a number of other Dominican groups that recorded popular Cadence-Lypso sounds in Martinique and Guadeloupe. It speaks to the receptiveness of the people in those countries to Cadence-Lypso music, and is one of the factors which caused the music to flourish in that market. Cadence-Lypso was created by Dominicans, played primarily by Dominicans, at least for some time, but it was done entirely for export, as there was not a market for the music in Dominica. So Henri Deb and Henri Deb or Debs, anyway, Henri Debs, right? Henri Debs from Guadeloupe, and another gentleman from Martinique called Nairado. They were the two more prominent, you know, record producers who sought out Dominican musicians to record. And they were recruiting Dominican bands to make records for the Cadence-Lypso market in the French territories. Naked Feet recorded with Nairado in Martinique. And those of you who don't know what I'm talking about, Naked Feet was a band I belonged to, right, in the 70s. So I can understand if you don't know what I'm talking about, right? But no, we're not too bad, you know, really. I mean, we're fairly popular enough, you know, yeah. And, yeah. Or in the other people in the band? Yes. Okay, there was yours truly, Tim Durand. There was Pat Aaron, Kelly, the Ghost Williams, Ras Kelly, Glenn John. He's out of the public eye now, but he was a very, you know, dynamic singer and stage, you know, frontman for the band. Linford John, his brother, who went on to play with Wafrikai and Bill O'Mend, was also part of the band. There was a gentleman called Corbo. Those of you who know Cora Richards, right, her brother was a drummer, and there's another guy called Roger Aaron. Randy Aaron, deceased, was also part of the band. There was a time, I mean, we had a 7 brass lineup, you know. So, oh yeah, man, yeah, Roy Chillingford, Lapo. I mean, tremendous keyboardist, man. Those of you who have heard the song Diabla, you hear the wonderful keyboard work that is done on that. Roy Chillingford is responsible for that. And me, well, I was just there, you know, in the band. Okay. All right, so prompted by offers of recording arrangements with record producers such as Debs, who we've already mentioned, Nairado and others, a number of Dominican bands converged on those two French islands, where, as we've already established, there was a vibrant market for Cadence-Lypso music. Although not all those records were financially successful, there were enough success stories to continue to provide an incentive for record producers to keep producing Dominican music, which in turn provided opportunities or created opportunities for those bands to perform at clubs, dances, and other events. Because dance music was the thing, yeah, in Guadeloupe and Martinique. That is what would get you a crowd. As I indicated earlier on, there was a lot of dances taking place, you know? All right, so but many of those bands didn't achieve any significant success, you know? They grabbed the opportunity. They were grateful for the opportunity. They embraced the opportunity to go to Guadeloupe and Martinique to perform. But it wasn't really a paradise, you know. There were many challenges. Some bands really guayed, you know. I remember, you know, Naked Feet, we spent, you know, I mean, we were given a place to stay. And it was a nice little place, nice little villa with a pool and everything. But we had problems feeding ourselves, you know. The money that we got from the gigs that we played would go towards food, you know. And sometimes if a lot of money didn't come in, boy, you had to struggle for food. So thankfully, there was this guy, Mango Long. I don't know if some of you here know him, you know. He had connections in Guadeloupe, and he would help us out, you know, use his connections to really get food for us, prepare food for us. And guys used to wait, man, expectantly, you know, for Mango Long to come, you know, with that food, you know. I have a story about Stumpy, but I won't give it to you. Norman Dorival, you know the guy, Norman Dorival. I have a story, but I won't give it because I would have to get Stumpy's permission first to do that. Okay, so there were exceptions, of course, to that. We know that. A lot of the bands didn't make any money. They got the chance to go up and play and to make a record, and sometimes it turned out to be successful, other times it wasn't. But they nonetheless still, if we got an opportunity now to do that again, we probably would. Because there was more to making money and, say, promoting oneself or getting any benefits out of that for oneself. It was seen as part of a movement that was mounted to promote, to embrace and promote Cadence-Lypso music. And we were happy to be part of that. Okay. So there were exceptions, eh? There were exceptions. Exile One, Gramax, you know, we know the stories of those bands. And to a lesser extent, bands such as Liquid Ice and Midnight Groovers. Liquid Ice had a good style. They made quite a few records. And if a record producer does a record for you and he goes on to do another one, it says then there was something good about the first one. He's not going to spend his money to do another record for you if the first one isn't good. So Liquid Ice, Midnight Groovers, you know, they also benefited. Because although the market was a large one in comparison to Dominica, as I said, and could only sustain 2 or 3 stars at a time, stars meaning people like Exile One, Gramax, they were referred to as stars, the big boys in the music, you know, and you couldn't have more than 2 or 3 of them in the market. It wasn't that big, you know, to sustain more. So for other bands to achieve that level, so to speak, they would have to displace those 2 bands. And I don't think anybody was able to do that. Okay, so let me just share this very quickly. McMurray was telling me, we had a conversation, there was some kind of rivalry between Exile One and Gramax, which was instigated by Nairado, who was using Gramax to create competition for the alliance of Exile One and Ari Debs, because Ari Debs was firmly in the corner of Exile One, and Nairado was the other, you know, competing producer, and he sort of created that rivalry between Gramax and Exile One, because, you know, basically he wanted Gramax to get a share of the market, so he too could benefit from that. And one of the areas of the music industry that those recording bands were not able to capitalize on at the time was that of copyright. They were not really making money from the sale of records, and most of them were not familiar with copyright matters, and so were not making any money from that source. It wasn't until Gordon Henderson opened that door through his association with French Copyright Society, SACEM. The other Dominican musicians would get the opportunity then to start earning royalties for their songs. So even then, when you were not making a lot of money from your gigs and you were not getting money from the sale of records, people couldn't get money for their songs because they didn't know about copyright. But despite the lack of financial success for those bands, and individually, the music continued to impact collectively. The musicians themselves were still appreciative of the opportunity to make their contribution towards the promotion of something Dominican, and despite the challenges, they would still go to Guadeloupe if asked. No matter how much guay, but they would still, you know, grasp the opportunity. Just as the band era of Cadence-Lypso music started to fade in the late 70s, a new Cadence-Lypso star started to emerge. Dominica's Lady of Song, the First Lady of Creole, and La Grande Dame de la Musique Antillaise, Ophelia. Ophelia became Dominica's first Cadence-Lypso female singer to achieve international star status. Gordon Henderson and Jeff Joseph had already walked that path, but Ophelia was the first female to achieve that level of recognition and success. We must not forget Janet Azuz, the mother of Dion, sitting right there, another Dominican female singer who made her mark in the Cadence-Lypso arena, but did not achieve the same level of recognition and success that Ophelia did. But we must acknowledge that she did make a contribution, and remember her for that. Considered the godmother of Cadence, Ophelia toured widely in France and had concerts broadcast over much of the Francophone world. Her first recording was I, Dominique, which became an iconic anthem for Dominicans. Everybody here knows the song. And Ophelia's husband, Marc Marie, told me that Gordon played a significant role in getting that song recorded and in introducing Ophelia to the French market. Ophelia, Gordon, and Jeff Joseph were able to keep Cadence-Lypso, that Dominican expression that Wadix has so interestingly coined, alive and kicking as the band era of Cadence-Lypso faded away. The cadence, or began to fade, I should say, after the number of bands that were playing Cadence-Lypso in the French islands was diminishing, and the focus was shifting to individual acts or stars who did not require a band to accompany them during the live performances because they could use playback. Like somebody told me, Asa Banton is doing quite well now, because Asa is a one-man show. So you hear him all over the place. And the reason for that, that he can so more easily get gigs than the other bands like TK and WCK, is because he walks with his band in his back pocket. Playback, okay? So that was beginning to evolve in the French market. That the bands were costly, and therefore singers, the promoters and the dance hall and club owners were looking for entertainers that they didn't have to spend too much money on, right? And that's when Ophelia came on the scene, and she exploited that. She took advantage of that situation. She took advantage of it. And, it worked very beautifully for her. So Gordon was able to continue successfully as a solo act after Exile 1 broke up, and so too the late Jeff Joseph, the leader of Gramax. Ophelia, Gordon, and Jeff were able to keep Cadence-Lypso, that Dominican expression, alive. Fitzroy Williams and Julie Morrill of Exile 1 also continued to perform as individual musicians. In fact, Gordon, I believe, produced an album for each of them under the Soul Tone label, which he owned. So that Dominican expression, Cadence-Lypso, presented the opportunity for both Gordon and Ophelia to represent Dominica in a broader capacity than just artists. So that expression went beyond the music itself. It positioned Ophelia and Gordon to be able to represent Dominica other than as entertainers. Ophelia, for example, that beautiful song, I, Dominique, which the lyrics sort of focused on the turmoil that was occurring in the country. When it was played in Guadeloupe, and the Guadeloupeans have for years now been sort of toying with the idea of independence. Those of you who've been to Guadeloupe can explain that better than I. But they've never really, anyway, they have been looking at it, and it sort of evoked some emotional reaction in them, in that they saw themselves as facing challenges as well as, excuse me, as challenges that were included or expressed, I should say, in Ophelia's song. So they kind of identified with that. And every time she went to Guadeloupe, she would be asked to comment, on matters of politics. She wasn't playing politics, but they just wanted her opinion because they felt that she had so beautifully captured some of the very issues that they were facing in their society in her song. And so she was more than just a singer who was being interviewed. She was somebody with an opinion on matters that they wanted to hear. Gordon Henderson would go on to become the ambassador for the World Creole Music Festival. I mean, he had gained such international recognition that the natural course of action for the organizers of the World Creole Music Festival was to use Gordon's extensive reach internationally to promote the World Creole Music Festival. So essentially what I'm saying is their impact and the ability to represent Dominica had sort of transcended just the music. And so that is also what the Dominican expression, the Cadence-Lypso, was able to do for us. Not just, you know, put us on the map as having created the music and producing some wonderful musicians and songs, but it also provided the opportunity for us to be represented beyond and you know, above just the music. Now, very quickly, on the local, there were two approaches, two ways in which the Dominican expression sort of evolved and manifested itself. One was what I just explained overseas, which was the major thing because that's where the music impacted the most, and that's where the people who went to play the music, you know, wanted it to impact because that's where they earned a living. But also in Dominica, things were happening. Dominicans were responding very, I think, strongly to this Cadence-Lypso music. They embraced it. I mean, I think, I do not believe that one can think of any I can't remember any Dominican who had an issue with Cadence-Lypso music. If somebody does, you can tell me. But when I played music on the radio and I played in the band, I do not remember anybody who had problems with Cadence-Lypso music. It was embraced by the Dominican public. The songs received a tremendous airplay on the radio. It helped to encourage our Dominican musicians to grab the opportunities which were being given by French record producers and promoters, and to play for live audiences in Guadeloupe, Martinique, French Guyana, and other places. Cadence-Lypso music was played everywhere, on the radio, in the dance halls, clubs, events, parties, everywhere. We were moving towards independence at the time, and people, it kind of fit in very nicely with the mood at the time, because people were beginning to feel, to think independence, and the fact that we had our own music now added to that sense of pride and, you know, identity. And so, as was pointed out in my intro, I also hosted a radio show that was dedicated to promoting Cadence-Lypso, and that was Genesis and Beyond, by playing the music and telling the stories of the musicians who played it. What emerged in Dominica was a movement of Dominicans who were committed to support the music, to support the Dominican musicians who played that music, and to promote something that we were proud to identify with as a product of Dominica. I was happy to be part of that movement as a radio personality and as a musician. Thank you very much.